Hey Paul, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, Mike. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
Good. Good. How'd your weekend go?
Yeah, fast. As
Yeah.
usual. Finishing up, some of the personal
Right.
funeral services, and that was
Yeah. That's never easy.
no.
Where is he going to be buried? Nearby?
No, well, no. We
No.
actually were up around Chicago where they're from.
Oh.
So we were up there Saturday. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And I'm going to send you an email when we get done. A few things we talked about in that meeting on Friday. I had a couple
Okay.
meetings this morning and get a little feedback from you. So I'll probably send something out this afternoon when we get done.
Okay. Sounds good. What do you got going on this week? You're leaving at the end of this week, right?
Yeah, Thursday evening. So get the pedal to the floor most of the week here. So
Where are you guys headed?
just south of Sarasota.
Oh, wow. You
Yeah,
driving? Or you
we do.
flying?
We'll
Driving?
drive. Yeah.
Okay. What kind of a drive is that, sir? That's got to be
Mm, I think
50?
16 to 17, depending on pit stops.
Oh, that's brutal.
Let me check with Dottie real quick. I was talking to her a minute ago, make sure she had the right link.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll shut the door so you don't have to hear me as often.
Well, good afternoon. I just want to let everybody know we'll get started here probably in about 2 to 3 minutes. Really large group today, and they're still signing in, so we're going to give it a couple minutes. Thanks.
All right, are you going back to the office? Are you going back to the office?
Hey, Dottie.
Hey, Michael.
How are you?
I am well, thank you. Just a little bit of a busy day. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Dottie. How are you?
Good. How are you, sir?
Yeah, it's all right. Good Monday.
Sure.
Yeah. If you say so, right?
Right.
Hey, Mike, how many folks participated last week? How many do you remember? How many
Right.
listened
It
in?
was around 100 schools from around the country.
Really?
Yep.
That's good.
Yep.
What do you have online now? Do you
About
know?
the same. Yeah. It's
That's
been
okay,
heavily.
good. Good.
All right. Well, I've got 2 minutes after, so we'll let folks continue to sign in as they need to, but we're not going to hold this up any longer. Well, I want to welcome everybody to the webinar today. Just a couple real quick housekeeping items because you probably overheard me talking with Paul. You know, we have about 100 schools from around the country participating today, so we have everybody muted. Just cuts down on a lot of the background noise. So if you have questions as we go through this, you'll see there's a Q&A area where you can post questions. And then as we wrap up here in roughly 55 minutes or so, we'll walk through those questions and answer any questions that you have. So just feel free to post those throughout the webinar, and then we'll answer them as we wrap up. Real quickly, I'm Mike McCarty, the CEO of Safe Hiring Solutions and Safe Visitor Solutions. We are an Indiana-based company just outside of Indianapolis. Prior to that, I was detective with the city of Nashville, Tennessee, and spent several years after I left Nashville doing training and consulting work on violence against prevention before starting Safe Hiring Solutions. I also want to introduce Dottie Davis. Dottie is joining us. Dottie she's currently the Director of Security for the Fort Wayne Community Schools in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where they have about 30,000 students, 4,500 employees. So really one of the largest school districts in the country. She has 63 buildings that she is in charge of maintaining security. Prior to joining Fort Wayne Schools, Dottie spent 31 years in law enforcement, where she retired as Deputy Chief of the Fort Wayne City Police Department. She also was, throughout her career, she was Director of Training for the Fort Wayne Police Training Center. She's got expertise in hostage negotiations, mental illness, supervision, internal affairs, and family violence. Matter of fact, Dottie and I have known each other a lot longer than I want to admit. We go way back to the early days when we were working to kind of change the way law enforcement responds to domestic violence. And so, you know, Dottie has a breadth of experience here, both from the law enforcement and the school perspective, and does a lot of training both nationally and internationally. Also want to introduce Paul Dvorak. Paul is on our Safe Visitor Advisory Board, as well as Dottie. Paul is the special agent in charge of the Indianapolis field office of the U.S. Secret Service. He's responsible for managing protective responsibilities for our nation's leaders and investigations impacting financial infrastructure and payment systems in the state of Indiana. He's also been reappointed as the Indianapolis 500 federal coordinator by the Secretary of Homeland Security. Paul also has coordinated overall security plans for 2 United Nations General Assemblies attended by over 350 world leaders. He also managed logistics for visits of a large number of foreign dignitaries coming to the United States. He served on presidential protective details for former President George W. Bush, where he conducted protective advances in physical security. So Paul brings a depth of knowledge when we start talking about how we create a safe school zone that really gets to the core of what he's done his entire career with the Secret Service, is creating those safe zones for the protected parties that he has been entrusted with. So let's get the PowerPoint started here. There seems to be a real, sense of urgency and a justified sense of urgency since the Parkland school shooting here a little over a month ago. We actually had a meeting this past Friday. We brought together some leading experts. Paul, Dottie participated. We had former Navy SEAL. We had security experts. We had law enforcement, school security folks. And we really met behind closed doors and really were talking through what's happening, where we need to go, what we're seeing. And, there's a lot of positive discussions that have started since the incident most recently in Florida. We're hearing lots of discussion about stronger background checks, talking about funding from states and discussions at the federal level. I just saw where our governor here in Indiana is calling for a special session because they didn't get some things finished, and school safety is one of the 2 items that was mentioned in the headline that I just saw before I walked in here. And we're starting to see, these really deep discussions about how do you create these safe zones around schools. Having said that, one of the things we talked about Friday and Paul and Dottie and myself have talked about for weeks is there seems to be a lot of focus on consultants and programs that really are not going to enhance student faculty safety. We're hearing a lot about reactive models. When I say reactive models, what I'm talking about is, once an active shooter is in the building, what do we do? And that is not to take away from that discussion. We absolutely should be prepared for that. But what we think as a team here that is really missing from this discussion is kind of the foundation of where we need to go, which is we've got to put some time and effort into the prevention side of this. And so, I've seen some things recently where they had students disarming active shooters, bulletproof, backpacks, and and I'm not disparaging any of these things. There's a lot of groups coming out of the woodwork right now with things that they can sell. And when you're scared, sometimes we purchase these things. But I think, if we step back and take a deep breath and look at some of these things, arming school employees. We had an incredible discussion with this group on Friday, and one of the advisory board members that joined us is a CIO of a large school district, and he was talking about a communication system that they own within the school that was very expensive. Each radio cost about $5,000. He was talking about how frequently he finds the radios laying all over the school where administrators forget them or leave them behind. But then he said something a little more alarming is how many times that an administrator has gotten into an altercation or tried to break up an altercation with a student and had that radio taken away from them. And then you start to put that into the context of what if that was a firearm and losing control of that firearm. And so a lot of these discussions that have really started to percolate, are not in and of themselves conversations we shouldn't have, but I think we need to step back and take a deep breath and really kind of assess, where do we start and where are we going to go with this? And there's a lot of things foundationally that we can do today. We can start the process today, and we can start moving towards some of these other processes, be it, technology and other things that can help us. And so I think you're going to hear a lot today about when we respond to somebody who's already in our building, we are already in a horrible position. And so how can we spend, our resources and training and time a little more wisely, and try to figure out how to widen that zone around the school to where that active shooter is not in the building. Yes, we want to be prepared if they enter the building, but how do we expand that perimeter and try to keep them out of the building? So as we talk about that, we're really talking about, how to adopt a prevention mindset. When I started in law enforcement in 1990, very reactionary system. And I would say even yet today in many communities, law enforcement is still predominantly a reactive model. Somebody steals your car, the police show up. Somebody breaks into your house, the police show up. And so with that reactionary model, it appears to be the same type of model we're kind of, working toward here with the school safety. What happened in Nashville is I can remember sitting around a table with police administrators, and they were telling me, you cannot prevent murder. And I said, I think you can, because, I'm working homicides of primarily women and children who were killed by an either current or former intimate partner or a father or a stepfather. And I said, look at all the paper trail here. Look at how many times we as law enforcement officers have been involved with this family before it turns into a homicide. And then you add in how many times somebody in other professional organizations have been involved with this family before law enforcement got involved the first time. So we were able to actually lobby our mayor at the time to create what turned out to be the largest domestic violence investigative unit in the United States, because we had 25 women and children dying every year in Nashville. And so we took a very strong prevention. The first time we got a report, if it was a push, a shove, harassment, then the full weight of the criminal justice system came down on that perpetrator, as well as programming and batters intervention programs and everything we could do to curb that behavior so that it didn't escalate. And what we found was the first year we started this program, we watched the number of murders drop by 50%. For a 10-year period that I was still involved in the program as a detective or consultant, it stayed true. So over a 10-year period, there was at least 120 people in Nashville that were alive that statistically, had we stayed with a model that says you can't prevent it, they would have been dead. And so I think that mirrors exactly what we're talking about here with school safety. We need to take a deep breath. We have to realize we may have to make some policy changes. We've got to get involved earlier. Not wait until somebody shows up at the school with a weapon and now we're trying to engage them. What are the signs and behaviors? How do we create these threat assessment teams? Dottie's going to share some statistics here, and it's going to feed right into, yes, I think you can prevent some of this. Coordinated community response. How do we work together? How do we share information? Sounds so simple, but I think Paul and Dottie would agree, even within law enforcement, the one thing we learned after 9/11 is you couldn't even get law enforcement to share information well, very territorial. And so, how do we begin to share this information? And then the training. It's not, we shouldn't treat this training as some kind of minimum level of training that we have to adhere to, but this is going to have to be a real training program for every employee, and it's got to be an ongoing program. It's not a single program where we do it one time and everybody's going to remember this. And so, really, if nothing else that, and we don't have a lot of time today, but if we really accomplish nothing else, is really laying that framework for, really looking at how do you adopt this prevention mindset. And then we're going to look at how can we be tactically prepared if in fact somebody breaches, our school, and how do we respond to that. So we need a total toolkit or a total package here. Because once somebody's barricaded in a school, it means our perimeter has been breached. We are no longer on the offensive. We're now on the defensive. Now we're trying to lock down rooms. We're trying to figure out how do we get out of a building. We're trying to figure out, do we hide under a desk? A lot of the discussions that are coming up today. And so what we want to do is push that safe zone out further away from the building, and so that, we are able to, deal with these threats outside of the building before they come into the building. And then we're going to use, in our plan, and this could be a multi-year plan. I mean, these are changes that cannot be made overnight. Yes, there's things we can do right now and can implement tomorrow, but, what are some technology, adding officers and training and some of these different components. First step is we've got to, address our policies and look at a roadmap and creating a roadmap for change. And so, if nothing else, I can tell you that the three of us are really coming at this from a prevention mindset. And so with that, I'm going to toss the first question over to Dottie. And, basically, Dottie, with all your experience in law enforcement, hostage negotiations, and now, years of leading, security for one of the largest school districts in the U.S., where do we start? If I'm sitting here on this webinar and there's so many things I'm seeing and hearing in the news media, I don't even know where to start. So where do we start?
So we can continue to spend dollars on security infrastructure, but all of it will be for naught if our employees don't enforce the security measures that we have in place. And so I really want to start with the front office and the importance of providing our employees in the front office with the power and the authority and the words in which to screen visitors. Screening visitors is extremely important for them to be able to hit an intercom button, ask the person, welcome them, ask them who they're here to see, what their purpose is, before they ever hit the door release. When I came to the district and as I worked around the country, I have many people say, well, we just let them in and then we figure out what they want. And it's estimated about 43% of our threats come in through the front door, enter into the main office. And we know that from several of our school shootings across the country, that they're looking for a way in. And so if you have people that do not properly screen individuals at the front door, then right there just increase part of your threats to your building. It's estimated by the FBI that 85% of the individuals who are going to wreak havoc on our buildings will tell someone about what they're going to do or what they are planning to do before it happens. And unfortunately, that information is received in a wide variety of ways. It may be on social media outside of school, but kids are telling other kids, they're telling their parents, they're telling school officials, and someone somewhere is thwarting that ability for us to do a threat assessment by saying they're a good kid from a good family, I don't think they have the means to carry it out, and therefore they don't report it. And so right there is a huge system failure. If 85% of the time they're telling people about it, there should be proper authorities involved in doing that threat assessment. And when I do training, I always ask individuals, if you receive that information, what is your background in that type of work? I know Paul has had extensive background in training and in being able to conduct threat assessments. And it certainly isn't just looking at another coworker saying, what do you know about this person? Do you think they can do it? Nah, I don't think they can. And that's the end of it. There's much more to that scenario. As we all know, seconds matter. And so as we have already started this webinar today, we've talked about the importance of securing the perimeter. And so we have to improve those soft skills. And one of the ways to improve your soft skills is to get your emergency plan out of a 3-ring binder and into an electronic format where people have access to that information at their fingertips. About a year and a half, 2 years ago now, I took our emergency plan for our district and wrote one emergency plan for every building. When I came, I could pick up an emergency plan and it would talk about codes and signals, and they would have a code purple and they would announce someone's name, and that was supposed to mean that there was a threat in the building. The police went to plain talk years ago, because we know that codes and signals in a crisis situation, people get confused. The shooter, the intruder, the person who is going to cause damage to you or your staff or your students, they know what they look like, they know what they're wearing, they know where they are. So why would we not announce that to everyone else in the building via two-way radios, a PA system, your loud voice, a bullhorn, whatever means you have available, to everyone, so that they can make a determination on what their action should be based on the information that they have just learned. So I ask you to consider looking at your emergency plan template. And there's more than one reason to have just one template. Think about this. We have employees that move from building to building. We have substitute employees that are at one building one day, at another building another. They need to know that the emergency plan is the same at that middle school as it is at that high school, as it is at an elementary school. Absolutely, your evacuation points and your reunification locations will be different, but that can all be spelled out in that emergency template that is standard across the district. And speaking of that plan, when we name our hallways, those buildings that have internet protocol or analog cameras, you might consider not naming them sixth grade hallway or rat wing or whatever special name you've given that location in your building. Consider north, south, east, and west. Because when first responders come into your building, sixth grade wing is not going to mean anything to them unless it's spelled out in large letters on the wall, but they will understand north, south, east, and west. So please consider renaming your cameras and your hallways for that very purpose. Presence of staff at arrival and dismissal. Most of our school buildings across the country, once school is in session, doors are locked. But we know arrival and dismissal time, oftentimes doors are open, they are propped open, they are unstaffed, and that creates a huge risk to the safety of our buildings and our people within them. So at arrival and dismissal, whatever doors, and I would ask that you consider how many are really necessary for you to have open. You got 1,500 kids coming in, I understand one set of doors is probably not enough. But if it's 2 or 3, each of those sets of doors need to be staffed by an employee. And that employee needs to be given the information about students who are expelled, currently suspended, or letters to parents or other members of the community that may be restricted or trespassed from your property. And yes, you have the authority to restrict people from being on your property. That letter should most likely come from the director of security or someone who is in charge of handling threats against your district, so that that letter goes out and the individual who receives it knows that they are not to be on that property, and if they come back, they do face arrest. So your staff members need to have that information. And with most visitor management systems that are with their weight, you will be able to load into that system those individuals that are excluded from your property. And having that information in there is so beneficial for that person who's just filling in for the day. They would have that information at their fingertips and know that person is not to be on the property and know not to allow them entry into the building. Staff members and all adults in your building, they should either have 1 or 2 tags on. They should either have your school corporation's ID tag visibly on them, or they should have a visitor management tag. If they do not, another adult in that building, it is their job. It is not just the SRO's job, the security officer's job. It is every employee's job to ask that individual who they are and how they can get them to where they need to be, which means the office, so that they can be properly checked in. And speaking of properly checked in, that is not a piece of paper where they get to sign any name on there. It is asking for identification so that we actually know who they are. And there's more to a visitor management system than just checking somebody against the National Sex Offender Registry. It's also being able to know who's in the building should a critical incident occur, because you have to account for that person as well. And maybe you've just narrowed your suspect list by having already identified that person should something horrible or tragic occur. Many school corporations are looking at secure vestibules, and I am a huge proponent of such an item. That is that once you are granted entry into a school, they can only be given access into the main office. And once in the office, then we begin the visitor registration process. That includes vendors, that includes our volunteers. Everyone should come in through door 1, your main door, where they are then fed into the office. Once in that office, then the front office staff should have the ability to press a button to be able to lock down should they see that this person is a threat to the area. So many corporations have gone to magnetic locks. The only thing I ask is for you to consider this. If you decide, you being the secretarial or registrar in the front office, that this person is a threat and you hit that magnetic lock, is your SRO or security officer locked into that wing, locked out of that wing? Because the magnetic locks prevent keys from working, prevent oftentimes your fob readers from working. So consider working with your company that is installing those magnetic locks so that you truly know how they perform. And if your secretarial staff is given a panic button, where does that panic alarm really go? Most people believe it goes straight to 911, to the police department. And in fact, I know the majority of those actually go to the alarm company. So you have a delay in response. When you believe the police are en route, there's really 2 minutes or more delay, because you're actually putting in a panic alarm to your security company, who then calls you back to find out if there's a problem, who then calls 911. And I hope you see just how long it took me to explain that, how much time is involved that we've wasted in not notifying the appropriate people. Substitutes coming into the buildings, if you do not have intruder lock sets on your classroom doors, in other words, where your instructors have to go into the hallway to lock their doors, you need to make sure that each of your subs have a classroom key that is issued to them when they arrive at the school to sub for the day. In other words, what's happening is they don't have the means to secure that door. And granted, I'm not saying that a lock on the door is foolproof. We know that they can be, people can still gain access in, but it is one of the initial first things that people will think about. Have an intruder lock set, and I do know they're extremely expensive, but if you have that, then the fine motor skills that are often needed in the time of crisis with someone taking a key and locking the door, we don't have to worry about individuals not being able to perform that task, because they'll be able to lock that door from the interior. Schools now are being offered, hopefully we'll see even more dollars coming from the federal government, if not the state government, for us to be able to hire school resource officers. But one of the words of caution that I would give everyone is, it is awesome to have a law enforcement officer in our buildings that have a lot of extra tools, access to information that we do not have, and training. But it is also extremely important that we provide education and make them part of the administrative team so that they understand how to work in an educational environment. Because there is a lot of transition that we have to provide them our tools, our language, so they understand that we do have code of conducts, we do have resources in which to handle discipline, that not everything has to rise to the level of a criminal offense. And so with SROs in the building, if you are supplying them an office and a computer, one of the other conversations that is occurring around the country is, are we supplying them gun safes? Because a majority of our officers will be armed with long guns that they do not bring into the building. long guns being shotguns or AR-15s, that they are issued. But if there is a critical incident, such as an active shooter in your building, they would have to leave your building to go out to their squad car to gain that weapon to bring it back inside. And so you might consider whether or not conversation around installing a gun safe as a cooperative agreement between law enforcement and the school corporation is something that you want to address. And lastly, I would leave you with a plan. And that is that so very long, people believed that we needed to get to a place and hide. And we've learned from Virginia Tech and Sandy Hook and so many other schools around the country that hiding and hoping is not a plan, and that many people will perish if we fall into that mode. And so I would ask you to consider a plan such as avoid, deny, defend, avoid, get out. And when I go and give civilian response to active shooter presentations, I'll just say quickly how many exits are in this room right now. And most people will count the number of doors, but they'll forget about the windows because it is a foreign thing for them to consider exiting out a window, especially if it's a second story. And folks, you'll survive a second story fall. And I think the alternative to that would be much worse if you stayed in that building. So the next thing is to process with your staff members, how do you break those windows? With what are you going to break those windows? Because the question always comes up, those windows open in, how are we going to get someone through that? And I always have to respond, nobody's opening those windows. So it's changing the mindset. It's getting people to, one, know that they have the authority and permission to act on their own. We are not looking for the principal or head administrator to make that decision for them. It's for everyone to be able to respond by providing what they see, the information that they learn, so that all can make a decision on the best way for them to improve their survivability in that type of situation. Mike, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thanks, Dottie. I did want to ask you one follow-up. You know, we had talked about this in a couple of the other webinars where we talked about the threat assessment and, you know, being able to analyze those threats. Who analyzes all those threats for you at your school?
We are fortunate that we have a strong working relationship with our local law enforcement officers, city, county, state, but certainly FBI, U.S. Marshal, DEA as well. And so we'll reach out to our partners and start to draw information about what we know. We will interview staff members. We will interview other students who may have heard the threat and start to put all the parts and pieces together to decide, is this a student we need to get services to immediately? Is this someone we need to suspend until we can further our investigation? It is almost a daily occurrence where this is going on in our district, where we are taking information and doing that type of threat assessment. I certainly can't do it alone. I have to rely on law enforcement partners and also school administrators to give me the information I need. Excellent.
Well, it's a perfect time to segue over to Paul. You know, those of you that aren't overly familiar with the Secret Service, or maybe only from movies, you know, the one thing that I will tell you about the Secret Service, you know, especially at the federal level, each branch of federal law enforcement typically is very specific in certain areas. Your Drug Enforcement Administration dealing with drugs, the FBI, a lot of counter terrorism work. When we talk about Secret Service, we're talking about an organization at its foundation. It's all about assessing threats. And when we turn this over to you, Paul, you know, one of the things we've talked about in the past is you've talked about all the work and the important work that goes in to the advanced work of Secret Service, going out in front of those that you're charged to protect and doing all the work and all the homework so that in essence, you do not end up in a situation where you're having to fight your way out of it. So how can schools take that same approach with that advanced work and apply it to their prevention policies or expanding that safe zone of security?
Well, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I think that a lot of what we do, we always consider our bread and butter to be the advanced work. I mean, without a doubt, we train for attacks and how to mitigate those if they occur for certain, but we we would consider that somewhat of a failure if it gets to that point. So it's all about prevention on the front end. And that's where we, like you said, we travel out in advance to do basically a threat assessment on wherever our protectees are going. So in that threat assessment, our main objective is to prevent anybody from coming into those sites. And even if somebody were to challenge that, what we want to do is, we want to be able to push that threat as far out as we possibly can. So, when we actually engage with attackers, being individual or multiple attackers, we want to do that far away from the site as possible. And so that's where we kind of develop what we call kind of a 3 rings of security. And I think you can apply that methodology to really any site and certainly a school. So, my approach to it would simply be, I think the outer perimeter would be the grounds of your school, the middle perimeter would be access into the school, and then your inner perimeter would be, anything within your school, within the walls of the school. So I think there's a lot of things you can do, and some of them really at no cost, and Dottie kind of touched on several of them in her presentation. But I think ultimately you just don't focus really just on the school. You kind of push that out. So if you're doing an assessment of a school, we'll start with the outer perimeter. What's around that school? Is it in a rural area where there is nothing around it, and it's just a lot of green space around it? Well, that causes some other concerns, right? If there's no fences, there's nothing to mitigate any kind of thing coming onto the grounds, well, then that's a vulnerability in and of itself. Other things that, maybe you're in an urban setting where you have, not only, maybe residential areas around, but you have businesses around. I talked about a school where my kids went prior to moving out here, and there were businesses adjacent to the school, and they got those businesses involved, and I'm sure they're even doing more of that these days. But go and talk to those businesses. If you see people hanging out in that parking lot of that business that, could be casing the school for whatever reason, somebody sitting in their car for hours, maybe it's when school's let out, right? Well, what is that person doing? It doesn't have to be that business that has to approach that person. Just, tell the school, let the school, call the resource officer or if there is one, let them call the local police, let them go out and check it out. But there shouldn't be somebody sitting in a car, during dismissal time, in a business across the street. But that's an easy thing to do. Somebody wouldn't maybe take notice of it. So know what's around your school. Think of the vulnerabilities they can have. They can also be assets though too. Don't look at everything as being, a negative. That business is another, set of 40 employees, if it's a decent sized business, another eyes and ears that are looking. Boy, they wouldn't want something to happen to that school any more than any of the parents would. So these are people that are going to automatically look out for your kids. And so, bring them into your plan, let them be part of it. Other things you can do kind of just on the grounds of your school, know the traffic pattern of your students, of the vehicles, cars dropping off, of buses that come in, and have a plan for every one of those. I can't stress it enough, and Dottie touched on it. If you have one form of entrance coming in to your school, that's what you want to shoot for. And if you do have that, then you have all your students coming through one door. There better be administrators and teachers, your resource officer outside, even when it's, 9 degrees outside, watching these students come in. Because again, like I said earlier, if something were to happen, you see something that doesn't fit, the resource officer, someone else could possibly address that situation much further outside of the school. So it's not now, in your main lobby where you're doing your visitor management. Boy, if that can happen further out, then you've bought yourself a great deal of time. So anything you can do to push that problem away. And to be honest, it's just a visual deterrent as well. If somebody is thinking about doing something and they see a resource officer, they see teachers out there, Dottie mentioned folks carrying around radios, all of that stuff, if you're thinking about doing something and you see that kind of visual deterrent out there, you may think again. And that might be just enough that you created or mitigated a problem. So it is extremely important that these people are visible outside. Same kind of thing with the vehicles coming in and out. I mean, that's an issue that we haven't really discussed a lot of, and it's a good thing that we haven't. But the potential, because of arrival and dismissal times, where everybody's entering and everyone's exiting at one time, if somebody really wanted to do some damage outside of any kind of weapon, as far as a firearm weapon, then a vehicle is a very easy thing to do here. So if you don't have a plan for mitigating something like that, and it can be pretty easy. I mean, it costs a little something, but it's a defense that can be used for years and years and years. We've all seen those big cement planters that are outside of office buildings, and you will see them outside of some schools now. Those are an excellent way to, again, when you have a lot of schools, you come into one entrance and exit into the school, but a lot of times that is like a courtyard kind of atmosphere. Well, that's a perfect, bottleneck where folks are coming in. If you drove a vehicle in through there, think of all the damage you could do. I think at the right time, it could be a lot more than what you would be able to do with a firearm. So something like that, you have to mitigate that. And it's not that difficult to do, and it doesn't cost a lot, but you have to think in those terms. And that's another point I kind of want to make as well. For any folks that is involved in any kind of security aspect, it's hard to do, but you have to think in the terms of if you were going to create an attack, what would you do? What would be, maybe the easiest way to go about it, and maybe not the easiest way, but what are the vulnerabilities? You kind of have to think like an attacker. And, that's certainly something that we do here at the Secret Service. And that can help you think ahead. You got to put yourself in that kind of dark mindset of what somebody may do. Other areas like bus drop-offs, and I've seen this at different schools being done very effectively. We use a lot of blocking vehicles. If you've been to any of our sites, you'll see big snow plows and dump trucks and big heavy equipment to block. Well, sometimes we even use school buses, right? Well, school buses are a great way, if you logisticate how you're dropping kids off, where they not only serve as their means of moving students to and from school, but when they're dropping off, you can position those buses in a way that they'd actually act as a blocking vehicle for a vehicle ramming type of attack. So, and I've seen schools do this, whether they are knowingly doing it, I'm not sure, but it's fairly effective the way they're doing it. They drop the kids off where they obviously off of a bus, you exit off of the right side, and those buses are canted in a way where they are closer to the door, and they protect anybody that would be coming around those buses from those kids. So that's a protection between the parking lot and the door of the school for those kids. And so, it doesn't cost anything to do that. I mean, these are simple things that you can look into now to try to help. The other things as far as fences and things around the outside, as far as using cameras, are effective means of all the other doors leading in and out of the school. Cameras, the prices of cameras have come down fairly significantly. Those are a great way to police those doors to make sure that they're locked. When they're not, if they're prompted, if they are popped open, now you have a camera to find out who did that, because that would be your first question when you see an open door walking around a school. Well, how did that happen? But more importantly, who did that? Are they doing it, just because they want to let their buddy in? Is it maybe even another teacher that's doing that? But you're going to want to know who that is, and it's got to be a policy in your school, that there is some type of punishment for that, because you can't allow students to prop these doors open. I mean, that mitigates a lot of the effectiveness of your security plan. So, those kind of things as far as cameras on doors are very effective. That they obviously, locked from the inside where somebody can't come from the outside and open them. So a lot of things like that on the, the outer perimeter and doors that aren't normally used. As far as the middle perimeter, your access into the building, the first and foremost thing, which Dottie did talk about, was a visitor management system. This has to be an effective system that works well in your school. So, I kind of challenge the schools out there, know what you're getting in that. If you don't have one, this is the kind of thing that you're going to need to look into. And if you do have one, make sure that it's doing what you want it to do, and that its checks are equal to what you want out of that program. Dottie touched on a lot of those things, but a lot of the screening of your visitors, criminal checks, a lot of them can be modified. You may want to do not just sex offenders, you may want some other checks in there as well. Well, make sure that that system is capable of it, and that the information where it's polling on, in other words, the criminal checks where it's getting that is the most updated information. It's not something that is just, giving you one database and that's it necessarily. I mean, it may be effective for what you want, but have somebody talk to you about that. Have somebody, you challenge those companies to make sure that you're getting what you want. But you really do need that. I mean, I kind of liken it to, a bank. I mean, we're all used to walking into a bank and you see, you might even see a security officer in a bank, right? But you sure see plenty of security. And they're able to, they have panic buttons, and they obviously have vaults and everything. Well, their main objective, obviously, is to protect any money that they have in that bank and other things, and obviously their employees as well. Well, what are you protecting in a school? You're protecting the students first and foremost, right? And then any employees as well that work there. But so if that's your objective, and you're letting people enter and exit the school without any kind of vetting process, well, how effective is that? Banks don't allow everybody to get into the vault, right? You have to have a certain kind of access to that vault. Now, why wouldn't you have some similar type of access into a school? If you're allowing these people to walk freely in and of your school, that's a big issue, and that's beyond an active shooter problem. I mean, there's a lot of other areas that this could cause for concern. So, a visitor management system is absolutely necessary. So, I think that's one of the things that schools, if you're going to go spend some money, that would probably be one area that you need to address, just because that is happening every single day to you, and it is not just an active shooter role. It's all kinds of other issues that can come up in a school. So as far as, we talked about some of the other doors and that you can have access to. Dottie mentioned that magnetic locks. I mean, that stuff, it is expensive. Not every door needs it. But your front doors where you have your visitor management access, you have to have the ability to lock that down. If you don't have it, then the rest of it isn't really worth anything. If somebody can come in, you know, and while you're trying to vet them, they just walk through the door and keep going, and you have no access to stop that person. Well, then it doesn't matter whether you had a visitor management system at all. I think another good thing, and it's not all that expensive either, again, in your vestibule where you're vetting your folks, you know, some type of film that you can put on the windows. You know, a lot of schools, obviously, the offices are, you know, the entrance are all window surrounded, and then you walk into the school. Well, you know, those films work really, really well. Now, they're not, you know, bulletproof, which is a term that, you know, I think we got a question last week on, and it might be worth just explaining real quick. When we throw that term out a lot, there's nothing that's bulletproof. That term really does not exist. You know, you hear it a bunch. Bullet resistance, yeah, there are things that are bullet resistant, but even they will break down. If you're using a certain caliber and you're shooting in the same area, you know, repeatedly, then even the best kind of, and there's levels of this, it's, you know, I don't want to get into all of that right now, but they will break down. Even the best level bullet resistant glass can break down. So we're not talking about a film that's going to protect you from bullets, but we're talking about a film that can protect you from entering into the school. So you know, somebody that, you know, has something with them, you know, grabs a chair, anything that can break that glass and they can continue to move. This will prohibit that person from doing it. And you can go online and look at some of these products and watch, you know, these big, huge guys with these bats beating on this glass, and they'll get in, but it might take them, you know, 3-5 minutes, and that should be enough that you can get help and be able to get that person under control. So, you know, that's something that I definitely would look into as far as, you know, entering the school. As far as, and again, like kind of other things that you can use, you know, I think, again, cameras inside, not just to see doors popped, but if you can get cameras inside your hallways, if you do ever have an incident in your school, you're going to want to know what that person is, and those cameras can be very, very effective for that. And they can be very small, where they, you know, may not even be very noticeable to an attacker. If an attacker sees one, they're probably going to, you know, well, I don't even know if they're going to be in that mindset that they're going to want to look for them to try to shoot them out. I think they're just going to be moving. But nonetheless, they can be small enough, and they can be, you know, same kind of colored as the walls, where, you know, you'd have to be looking pretty hard for them. So, but if you can identify where that attacker is, I mean, think of all the shooting incidents that we've had, and the big problem is, where is this person? Is there more than one? Where are they? What direction are they heading? All of that is unbelievably useful information, not only for law enforcement that should be responding on the scene and coming into the school, which, by the way, you know, their tactics have changed a little bit different than they have, you know, 10, 15 years ago. I mean, now they are coming right into the school, and they're going right for the attacker, where they would stay out and they would try to assess a little bit. Well, they're not doing that anymore. They're coming right in. So, you know, if you can identify where that attacker is, that is a huge advantage to the local police that are arriving, but it's also an unbelievable advantage for your students. You know, what direction, you know, Dottie touched on the avoid as being the first means during any type of active shooter incident. So if you can avoid that, you know, if you know these schools, particularly these high schools, can be enormous. So if that shooter's on the other side of the school, I mean, do you even need to be going through a window and breaking them and getting out? Well, if you're on the other side of a big school, no, you go through that hallway and get out, and, you know, more people you're not causing damage to other kids where they're getting trampled and going through broken glass and all of that. I mean, there's great way to get out of that building if it's a big enough building, but you got to know where the active shooter is, right? You can't just send kids down a hallway. So anyways, those are the kind of things that you want to kind of concentrate on in the inner perimeter. A couple of things that I just want to touch on real quick as far as the inner perimeter. the Secret Service, we did a study years ago, but it's really pertinent today as well. And here's, I just want to talk about active shooter just for a little bit, because I'm sure that some of the listeners, that's probably one of the main reasons that they tuned in here. And here's some of the general findings that were from this study that we did, that incidents of targeted violence in schools weren't sudden or impulsive acts. Okay, so this wasn't something that a kid came in school, somebody irritated him in school and then he went off. Most of these are not only thought of for weeks, maybe even months prior to. Prior to most incidents, other people knew about the attacker's ideas and a plan of attack. I think that's pretty well documented in any of these shootings that you see these days. And a lot of that through social media, by the way. Most attackers engaged in some behavior prior to the incident that caused others concern or indicated a need for help. So, this is, and I'll get to this point here in a second. A fourth finding was there was no accurate or useful profile of students. Well, I think there might be a little bit of a profile here. I may disagree with this one a little bit, but generally, that it could be anybody in the school, and I'll talk about that in a second as well. Most attackers have difficulty coping with significant losses or personal failures, and many have considered suicide themselves. I think this is a big finding here, and this is where, from a school perspective, we have to get everybody on board, and everyone of the stakeholders has to have an active role in this process, because I think this is what you're finding more and more with any kind of incidents in school. So let's, for a second, not focus outside of active shooter. There's a lot of things in school that, the bullying and the fights and all kinds of other things. To have an active shooter in your school, it would be pretty rare. But by addressing some of these other things, you're addressing a lot of other issues in the school. So, if you focus, again, kind of in the continuum of any kind of incident, whether that be an attack, whether it be, I don't mean just an active shooter, maybe an attack on a teacher. We've seen plenty of those. But you're seeing, if you move back, you're seeing kids with issues, whether going through a divorce that they're having a hard time coping with, it could be some mental issues that the student is having. But we have to start to recognize those well in advance. And that's a better way, I think, of getting in front of these issues than it is on the reactionary side of trying to come up with a plan during an active shooter. So, those are the kind of things that students, parents, I think a really good source in this are folks that work in the school, not just teachers, but, I think kids are they will speak freely around people they don't think that are listening. I mean, whether that are the folks in the cafeteria, the bus drivers, these are folks that can be a tremendous help to a school. And it comes with some training, and it comes with, trying to get them to buy into the system. And I think that's what's really important. It's got to be a team effort. I also think that, excuse me, that background checks, excuse me. Sorry, that background checks are a big important aspect of school security too. Making sure that everybody in your school gets a regular background, because you never know how lives change. They could be going through a divorce themselves, or they might not even be associated with the school, but their spouse that they're having issues with work there. There's all kinds of financial issues that people go through and are stressed by. So, and they just don't, deal with those kind of stressors, and they want to take it out on somebody that might not even be related to the problem. So those are areas that the background checks are extremely important to always have updated. I mean, we here at the Secret Service, we get background checks on all employees every 5 years. So I think that's a good benchmark to use even at schools. I want to finish by talking a little bit about what Dottie said with the avoid, deny, defend. I think this is a really good point and something that all schools should adopt. That hide aspect of it. I think that's a difficult way to go. I really do. I think there's a big difference between cover and concealment, and most things in a school, they're not going to give you cover. They're going to give you concealment. So, it's not going to protect you from any kind of bullets or, any other kind of device that somebody may have. Your best bet, if you can figure out where that attacker is to get out of the school, and not just 5 feet out of the school. Get off the grounds of the school. Keep going. That deny, that's where you're barricading, where a shooter can't get through. Again, those shooters, we're seeing it, that they're going for easy access. So if you have doors that are closed and locked and barricade, they're likely going to continue to move down the hall. And then at the last, defending yourself and others. And the other point I kind of want to make along those lines is, during this whole process, from a teacher's perspective, you're going to see people that are going to freeze up in these situations. They've never been in that situation before. I mean, you can't even expect an officer sometimes to react the way that they should. So, if you see these folks, grab them, pull them out, take them with you, and you're going to have plenty of students there too. I have these conversations with my own kids that you're going to see people that are going to freeze up when they can't move. If it's, and it's not just for an active shooter, folks, it's for a fire, a tornado, folks that are just scared, that comes with some training. So, if teachers are online, make sure that you are looking for that in any kind of incident in your school, and make sure that you're grabbing these people and taking them with you, and if you can shake them kind of out of it, then sometimes they'll come back to you and kind of get back into the game. But lastly, the thing I want to end with is and we kind of have the philosophy here as well. You got to do something. In any of those situations, you got to do something. And even if it's the wrong thing, it's better than not doing anything at all. But, that's where a good emergency plan, we're in some good training where, if you're in that kind of brain freeze where you're having a hard time, you're going to go back on what you trained and what you remembered. And so if you focus on that, you're going to be much better off. So sorry that, it's coming up on time, but, I think I did this last week too.
That's good stuff though, Paul. Thanks. We are about to wrap up. I think we've addressed this. There are things you can do immediately. One of the things we're working on coming out of this meeting on Friday is trying to put together really a toolkit. And we hope to have something like this put together relatively quickly that just kind of helps you figure out where do we start, how do we start, and then how do we determine where we can go? What are the things we can do today? How do we control the access and the management of visitors and really phase in all of these different things? So there's lots of things we can do immediately. What is the technology we can use? One of the things Dottie, I don't think mentioned, they're getting ready to deploy with a partner, and we're hoping to share this as part of the toolkit, is a texting model for anonymous tips. You're not going to get a kid, you're not going to get my kids to make a phone call. They don't pick up the phone and call people very often. They'll sit across the dinner table and text me. And so creating an environment where the students are comfortable and know that they can do it anonymously, because we see how much of this information has been shared from somebody who's going to commit one of these acts. So just looking at the lots of different technology, there's facial recognition. There's a lot of things that we are seriously looking at right now, and the price of that is coming down significantly that can be integrated within the visitor management access control system, potentially flagging people outside of a house. And so, that's kind of the next phase. What are some of the technology? What is the long term? The vestibules, if we don't have them, how do we construct them? How do we keep people, outside the building before we allow them to come in? We're looking at technology now where we can actually scan you outside of the building and not wait until you walk into the building to determine we don't want you in the building. And so looking at some of that technology, I mentioned this meeting we had on Friday. We're also going to be looking for a group of school advisors. And so as we put this toolkit together, we want folks from schools to look at it. When we built programs like our visitor management system, Dottie sat at the table from the time we wrote it down on a piece of paper until now. And so for years, and so we want input from schools. We've got some upcoming learning opportunities. We're hosting a security camp here in the Indianapolis area on April 17th, and many of you are from all over the country. We've got inquiries from Florida and different parts of the country about hosting this same security camp. And so if you're interested or want to know more about it, you can't come to Indy in a month, but you want to know how could we host the same kind of security camp here in our state, all you got to do is reach out to me. You should have my contact information. If not, I'll put it up here. We do a weekly demo. This is what a visitor management should look like. You can sign up for that on our website. We work with different states. We just recently integrated the Washington State Police background check into a visitor management system. Why? Because schools are required to use it. Make it easier for them to get access to that information. And then within this toolkit, there's a whole range of security aspects of this, from the visitor management, the background checks, but how do you do an assessment? And more, this is not a checklist that really a school is going to be able to do on their own. You really need a consultant that can come in and really, map those vulnerabilities and give you a roadmap of things that you could do or change. Training. We've said that a lot, but that's the key component right here. If you need more information, here's my contact information. I'm going to pause here for a second. I'm going to open up. It looks like we have at least one question. Will we be able to download a copy of this afterwards? Great question. And so what we will do is we have made one of the previous presentations available online. Actually, if you go to our website, safevisistorsolutions.com, you will be able to see a copy of the slides right underneath the header. Click on that. It'll take you to a recording of, I think, the first webinar that we did. I can also make the slides available as well on the website, and we'll do that also. All right, sorry we ran over just a few important topics. Again, Dottie, Paul, thanks. I know you guys are very busy. Appreciate you taking time out of your day to do this. And if you have any questions, reach out to me. I can channel you to Paul, Dottie, or anybody else to answer the question if we don't know it. Otherwise, have a great afternoon. See you guys.
Thanks.